Here's a more elaborate, refined, and extended version of your script, keeping your analytical tone but making it more engaging, deeper, and long enough to stretch toward a 40-plus minute delivery when read naturally. The call has already been made, not a rumour floating around social media, not a vague report from a source close to the situation. This is far more direct than that. Intermediaries acting on behalf of Vinicius Jr. have made contact with Manchester United. That is where things stand right now. And the number attached to that contact is staggering: £500,000 per week. No bonuses, just base salary. A figure that instantly changes the scale of the conversation. But here is the part that completely flips the narrative. At the exact same time those conversations were being initiated behind the scenes, Vinicius Jr. was sitting in front of a camera, calm, composed, and very clear with his words. The club of my dreams. 4 words that shift everything. Because he was not talking about Manchester United, he was talking about Real Madrid. So what is actually happening here? Is this the beginning of a blockbuster transfer? Or is this something much more calculated, much more strategic, and much less likely than it first appears? Let us slow this down and really break it apart. The initial report tells us that Manchester United have been alerted to a potential opportunity. That wording is important. Alerted. Not approached for a deal, not negotiating, not submitting a bid. They have simply been made aware that a situation might develop. And the people doing the alerting are intermediaries, agents, representatives, individuals who often operate in the space between clubs and players, sometimes with aligned interests, sometimes with their own agendas. Now pair that with the second key detail. Contract talks between Vinicius Jr. and Real Madrid are ongoing. That one line carries more weight than everything else combined. Because when a player is actively negotiating a new deal with their current club, especially a club like Real Madrid, it usually means one thing. The intention is to stay. And then there is the salary demand. £500,000 per week. That is not just a high number, that is a statement number. That is a number designed to do one of two things. Either establish Vinicius at the absolute top of the wage structure at Real Madrid, comparable to players like Kylian Mbappe, or create noise externally that strengthens his negotiating position internally. Because, let us be honest, from Manchester United's perspective, this is not realistic right now. Financially, structurally, strategically, it does not align. Committing that level of salary would break their wage model and create ripple effects across the entire squad. And this is before even discussing a potential transfer fee, which would likely exceed £100 million. So when you strip away the headlines and focus on the actual evidence, this begins to look less like a transfer story and more like a negotiation strategy. And then you bring in the most reliable layer of information in modern football reporting: direct quotes. When a player speaks publicly, especially through trusted journalists, that is where the real signal is. Vinicius Jr. has made his position clear. He is calm. He feels valued. He has the backing of Florentino Perez. And most importantly, he wants to stay. Not just stay, but stay long term. He has said it more than once. He has reinforced it. He has repeated it. That consistency matters. Because players who want to leave do not speak like that. They do not talk about calmness. They do not talk about long-term futures. They do not call their current club the place of their dreams. The language does not match the idea of an exit. So where does that leave Manchester United? It leaves them in a familiar position, watching, monitoring, being linked, but not actively moving. And that distinction is critical. Now, shift the focus slightly. Because while the Vinicius story grabs attention, the more important conversation is actually happening underneath it. The financial reality of Manchester United's rebuild. This is where the Champions League comes in. Football finance expert Kieran Maguire laid it out very clearly. Qualification for the Champions League is not just a sporting achievement, it is a financial engine. A guaranteed baseline of around £70 million when you combine participation money, matchday revenue, and commercial bonuses. And that is before progression. If United go deeper into the competition, those numbers escalate quickly. 100 million, 120 million, potentially more. That is transformative. And this is where the real strategy begins to take shape. Because with that kind of financial boost, Manchester United can operate differently in the transfer market. They can be more aggressive, more competitive, more aligned with the elite clubs they are trying to catch. Which brings us to a far more realistic and interesting name, Eduardo Camavinga. This is not just a rumour, this is a developing situation with real substance. A 23-year-old midfielder at Real Madrid, already proven at the highest level, but currently not playing the role he wants. Reduced minutes, positional discomfort, a sense that his potential is not being fully utilised. And here is the key detail about Real Madrid. They do not hold players against their will. If a player wants to leave, they negotiate, they find solutions, they move forward. Camavinga fits the exact profile Manchester United should be targeting. Young, proven, motivated. Not coming in at the end of his career, but right at the beginning of his peak years. This is not a Casemiro situation. This is a long-term investment. And if the conditions align, this becomes a move that makes sense on every level. Footballing, financial, strategic. Now layer that into the broader conversation about Manchester United and player development. There is a growing narrative that players improve after leaving Old Trafford. It is not just a theory, there is evidence. McTominay in Italy, Højlund finding form, Rashford rediscovering himself elsewhere, Antony showing flashes away from the spotlight. But Scott McTominay himself pushed back on that narrative, and his argument is worth listening to. He says the infrastructure was always there, the coaching, the preparation, the support systems, everything required to succeed. His point is that the difference is the spotlight. At Manchester United, every performance is magnified, every mistake is analysed, every dip in form becomes a storyline. And there is truth in that, because playing for Manchester United is not just about football ability, it is about handling pressure. Constant, relentless, global pressure. But there is also another layer. Many of these players who improved did so outside the Premier League. In environments with different tactical demands, different physical intensity, different expectations. So maybe the truth sits somewhere in the middle. It is not just a Manchester United problem. It is not just a player problem. It is a combination of environment, system, and individual adaptation. And that is exactly why recruitment matters so much now. Because every decision from this point forward shapes the next phase of this club. Do they chase headlines? Or do they build intelligently? Do they react to noise? Or do they follow a clear plan? Because the Vinicius Jr. story, when you really break it down, is noise. Interesting noise. Attention-grabbing noise. But still noise. The real story is the rebuild, the structure, the strategy. Michael Carrick being backed by Wayne Rooney is another example of that internal conversation. Stability versus change. Familiarity versus ambition, results versus long-term vision. The same applies to players like Manuel Ugarte potentially leaving, or younger targets being monitored across Europe, or experienced Premier League options like Harry Wilson being considered for immediate impact. Every piece fits into a bigger picture, and that picture is this. Manchester United are at a crossroads. They have the potential financial power if they secure Champions League football. They have emerging clarity in their recruitment approach. They have decisions to make at managerial level. And they have a squad that still needs reshaping. The temptation will always be to chase the biggest names, the biggest headlines, the Vinicius Jr. type moves. But the smarter path, the more sustainable path, is identifying the right players at the right time for the right system. Camavinga fits that. Others may too. Vinicius Jr., right now, does not. And unless something dramatically changes, all the evidence points in one direction. He stays at Real Madrid. Manchester United move forward with their rebuild. And the real story continues to be not who they are linked with, but who they actually choose to become. Because this summer is not just about transfers, it is about identity. And the decisions made in the next few months will define that identity for years to come.